Okay, so welcome everyone to this week's webinar. We're really fortunate again to have two expert speakers which can hopefully help you employees as part of this program. I'll introduce them briefly, but part of the reason we've asked them to engage on this webinar is that they're in a unique position. So Tom and Chris, who we'll speak to you in a second. Wave guys, say hello. So they're in a unique position because they're not only recruiters, so they're experts at CVs and interviews and all those sort of things, and they can give you loads of tips on how to pass the test of getting a job, because what we're finding with a lot of Kickstarter employees is they're really, really good when they get into the role, but the challenge is getting into the role and passing the test of the interview and the CVs and all those sorts of things. So they're also in a unique position because they're both employers on the Kickstart scheme, so they can tell you what it's like from an employer's perspective. Okay, so I'll pass you over to Paul first. If you can introduce yourself and just explain your background, that'd be really helpful.
No problem. Thanks, Mark. Right, nice to meet you all. Thanks for taking the time to come into this session. Hopefully, you'll get something valuable out of it. My name's Paul Connolly. I'm the managing director and owner of a company called 300 North. We're a recruitment company based in Headingley. We've been going for about 7 years, and I've personally been in recruitment for longer than that, 17 years. So I've seen lots of CVs, interviewed lots of people, been there, done that, seen everything. So yeah, hopefully I can give you some advice which is going to help you to secure a job.
Over to you then, Tom. Introduce yourself.
Yeah, so I own Post Recruitment. Post Recruitment's been going for about 7.5 years now. We recruit for digital sales, business support. Personally, yeah, like Paul, I think it's about 18 years I've been in recruitment. I was trying to do some maths before I did this as to how many CVs I think I've read, and doing the maths as to how many you read a day for how long. I reckon I've just passed the 100,000 mark. So hopefully I know what I'm talking about with stuff like this. So yeah, hopefully be able to pick up something along the way.
Okay. So obviously, you know, we'll briefly touch on other stuff, but the main focus of this webinar. Sorry, Jason, can I just mute you? You can mute yourself. Just a second. Okay. So the first question to ask you guys is, why is it so important to have a good CV? What's the history behind it? What's the background? Why should you have a good one?
Are you going for me or Paul?
Go first.
Starting with you then, Tom.
A CV is it's tradition now. The CV is going to be the first way you're going to get your details in front of any employer. So forget the social media, forget anything else. Right now, for you to apply for a job, you need to get a CV. It's your foot in the door, all the rest of the cliches. So it has to make an impression, not a crazy impression, but a traditional work-focused impression. Without it, I think in today's market, especially, you're going to struggle. So it needs to be right.
Okay. Tom, thanks for that. Paul, what about you then? What have you got to add to that?
Like Tom said, it's the first impression that someone gets of you. They haven't met you, haven't seen you. All they're getting is a CV on a computer screen. So that first impression is absolutely vital. Employers and recruiters, but employers and recruiters, you can scan a CV in seconds, and if that CV isn't formatted correctly, it isn't easy to read, it isn't in the order that sort of employers and recruiters are used to seeing, that they might just move on to the next CV. As cold and as brutal as that sounds, that is what happens. So the CV is absolutely crucial in getting that first impression.
Okay. So moving on to the next question then. So what makes a great CV then? You know, in your experience of seeing thousands and thousands of these, what makes a great CV? You first.
I'd say, first part, as I wrote, the things that I wrote down is someone who's been honest, someone who tells the truth, someone who can tell you a little bit of a story. Importantly, someone who can answer the questions I have when I want to be looking at a CV. So instead of a big list of duties or what they think people need to know, it's being able to give me the information before I need to ask the questions. They're the ones I'm going to engage with. They're the ones I'm going to keep reading because I've got more and more information in front of me. Now, it doesn't mean that I need chapter and verse and your entire life story, but for whatever role you're applying for, you can tailor it. You can make it a little bit different. You can bring out a little bit more experience that you've had, whether it be education, whether it be actual workplace, voluntary, the Kickstarter experience that you're picking up. Tailor it, make it relevant for what you're applying for. One of the worst things that we get is when someone's just sending their CV just en masse to as many jobs as they can, because it doesn't fit, it's not tailored, it doesn't engage the person at the other end of the screen. And if I'm going to say the bit that I say right from guys who are trainees, apprentices, right through to managing directors with the rest of the business that we've got here, it's volumes and values. If you can put your CV into a context, it really, really helps. So that might be that the post assistant in a huge bank will probably earn more and potentially have bigger prospects than someone who's got a managing director title for a company that they've just made up. It needs to be in context. How many employees were you working with, or how much responsibility, how much improvement, what did you do for the company that you were working with, or the body that you were volunteering with? Just give somebody a little bit of context, because what you're clear within your head doesn't always translate across onto a CV. So if you're working with a successful team of 10, tell people you're working with 10 people. It shows that you've been in that sort of environment, and you maybe have just a little bit of office etiquette. Or if you're working by yourself, what qualities did you need to be able to work with yourself? Why was that? So explain your situation a little bit more. And I think the language that you use when you're doing that, when you're giving all these fantastic describing words that you will put on your CV, it really helps engage the person at the other end of it. They'd be my tips to start off with.
Over to you then, Paul. What would you like to add?
I've actually written a sort of a five top tips, which I'm quite happy to send through and share after this call, Mark. But number one is it's get the CV in the right format. I know I mentioned that before, but you've got to have it in the right kind of format that makes it easy for people to read. It's got to be in chronological order. Don't put your last job at the top. Your first job at the top. It's got to be your most recent employment. But the number one first tip is put it in the right format. Make sure that text is aligned down the left-hand side. Don't center it all down the middle. That just looks messy. Choose a font that is easy to read, something like Cambria or Arial, Helvetica. They're all good fonts. Don't overdo it. So the old less is more is true. And if you can get everything on one page, great. 2 pages is fine. But I wouldn't go any longer than 2 pages at the minute. Obviously, as you get more experience and your career develops, then it's going to be more difficult to get that all on 2 pages. But for now, 1 or 2 pages is sort of definitely the maximum that you want to go for. Simple things. So you'll be surprised at how many CVs we receive through an application that don't have people's contact details on. They don't have a phone number. They don't have an email address. They don't have an address where they live. And that's just an absolute must. Make sure that your contact details are in the header at the top of the CV, or it's the first thing if it's not in the header. So your full name, phone number, email address, and address. Those simple things are sometimes the thing that will make the person reading the CV skip and go on to the next. If they don't know where you live, or they can't see how to get hold of you, chances are there's a risk that they might just move on to the next CV. So number one, choose the right format. Number two, put your contact details on the CV. Number three is write a personal statement. Well, this doesn't have to be a long paragraph, just 3 or 4 sentences about you. So who you are, what you can offer the employer, and something like what are your career goals? What is it that you're actually wanting to achieve? Tailor that to the advert. So when you talk about what you can offer, tailor it to what they're actually looking for. Sounds simple, but make sure you try and tailor it to what it is. And I think Tom touched on that earlier. Number 4, make sure you include your education and any qualifications or courses that you've taken. Again, that's one of the key things that an employer would look for. Usually, so if it's your school, include the name of your school, where it was, the years that you attended it, list any individual qualifications or courses that you gained, and again, put them in chronological order. And then number 5, it's the work experience or any volunteering experience that you've done, and put the most recent one first at the top. Okay, so we want to know if it was a job, who did you work for, what was your job title, and what dates did you work there, and then simple bullet points around what you actually did, what were your duties, and a real sort of top tip is include anything sort of any successes, anything that you did which helped to improve that business or improve the service that they were offering. Anything that you can demonstrate is measurable. If you haven't had a job, then if you've got any experience, then list any volunteer experience, then list that. If there isn't anything, then obviously leave it out. But if there is, then yeah, most recent first, and then go work backwards. And simple things like double space in between each one. So you've got lots of white space in between the volunteer experience or the job that you've done. So it's easy for the person to read it. Again, it's just making it as easy as possible for someone to look at that CV and go, right, I can see where they live, I can see what qualifications they've got, I can see the personal statement, and I can see what they've got in terms of experience. Make it easy. So they're my 5 top tips.
Tom, anything to add to that on top of those great things from Paul?
Yeah, like you said, achievement. What are you proud about? If you get through to an interview, people want to know why you're proud. What gets you excited about the experiences that you've had. That always translates really, really well in an interview and going through. So if there's something that a really keen interest that you have, something that you devote a lot of time and energy into doing, any achievement, anything that makes you proud about your experience, Paul was saying, really shout about it. Even to the point that you may not have the right work experience, but if you share a passion about, I don't know, a sport, anything else outside of work, that may be enough to actually start talking to an employer just to get the conversation going, especially when there's not too much work experience to be going on with. So anything you've achieved, anything you're proud of goes a very, very long way.
Yeah, hobbies and interests are definitely, I would agree, that's something that I look for. If we're looking to take someone on who's I don't know, fresh out of school or college, who doesn't have much work experience, I always look at what their hobbies and interests are, and that tells you a lot about the person. And you'd be surprised at sort of the interesting things that people would maybe leave right at the bottom of the CV, last thing on their CV. That is sometimes the one piece of information that has made me want to interview that person.
Me too, completely.
Find out more.
Yeah.
So we've got a quick question from Edwin. Do you want to unmute yourself, Edwin, to ask the question, or do you want me to ask it on the chat? I'll ask it because so Edwin wanted to ask, what does he think of sorting work experience by relevance to the job in the CV? Sorry, he's just said he's not got a mic. So yeah, so work experience, because you know a lot of the young people, they might not have loads of roles to put on there. So how relevant is work experience, and what order do you put it in?
I'd always put it in chronological order, so the most recent one first. I wouldn't necessarily rank it in how relevant it is to the job. I'd always still keep it in the chronological order. What would be possibly a good thing to do if you wanted to highlight some sort of specific experience or skills that you've got, you could include that in a covering letter, or an email to accompany the CV, just so that you can sort of make sure you are highlighting what it is that you wanted them to pick up on. But yeah, I'd still keep it in chronological order, but highlight it on an email or a covering letter.
I think what you can do as well is if it's going to be an office-based job and your last two roles have maybe been shop work or something voluntary, you can still make it chronological, like Paul says, but don't have quite as much information with each one. So if it's shop work, voluntary, and you're relying on that office work, then you can really put a lot of information in there. So the person who's looking at the CV will maybe bypass the first two, knowing that not as relevant, and then go really to where the body of the text and where there's a little bit more experience, and that's straight to where the information is going to be.
Good tip. Yeah.
So yeah, thanks for answering that question then. So a few other things then kind of stand out from what you've said there, and it raises some other questions. So obviously all the guys that are applying for jobs, either they did it as part of the Kickstart scheme, you know, it's going to be relevant at some point in their career and future. How long do you guys and recruiters actually spend looking at a CV?
Personally, I think you can have a warm and fuzzy feeling, or I'm moving on, probably within about the first 4 or 5 seconds. And that goes right through to very senior appointments as well. That's not just fresh school leavers. I think that goes all the way through. You can be very, very quick and quite brutal with the way that you're going through applications.
I'd agree completely. Within seconds, you can, if what you see in the first few seconds is what you're looking for, then you'll spend more time reading further down and spending more time looking through that CV. But within seconds, and yeah, and it might sound harsh and brutal, but that is the reality of what happens, which emphasizes the fact that getting that CV in the right format, in the right order, is absolutely vital. It's the same if you meet someone in person, face to face, you form an impression of that person in the first 7 seconds. Apply the same thing to looking at a CV. You form an opinion of that CV in the first few seconds.
Yeah, just to reiterate that, I think it highlights to everyone who is going to be applying for jobs in future how important it is to stand out. So what are your other tips on standing out? What's your views on putting a picture on there or not? Is that standard? Does it look weird? I don't know. What's your views on it, Paul?
For me personally, I would say no picture. Generally the CVs we receive don't have a picture on it. If I was to say roughly what percent it does have a picture, I'd probably say 2 or 3% of the CVs we receive have a picture. So I would say, no picture. But just make sure you've got your contact details. Like I said, name, address, contact details. They're the sort of the first things to put at the top.
What about you then, Tom?
I'd say absolutely no picture, not for a CV. It's not the place for them to be. And one thing I've just thought of, which is very, very relevant to probably everybody on this call, if you send the CV through, and like Paul said, it's engaged and the employer wants to reach out to you, what we will do as a matter of course is check out everything else that there is pretty much online about you, whether that's Facebook, whether that's LinkedIn, anything else you've got. That'll have pictures on. That will help if we need anything like that we need. So in terms of having your CV correct, make sure that's also reflected in anything else that you've got, any other presence that you have. If you do have a LinkedIn account, that your CV is in line with that, which is kind of your online CV anyway, but making sure that those two are the same and that one's been, I suppose, changed too much, that everything else is aligned. So yeah, there's another tip for you.
Okay, so what are other ways to stand out then? If everyone's using, a similar font and they can't put pictures on it, how do you, and you're only spending seconds on it, or any recruiter or any employer is only spending seconds looking at this sort of stuff, how do you, because most of the people on the call and most of the Kickstarters that we've helped, they're really, really good candidates. And once they get into a job, they prove themselves, but it's getting past this, test or this gatekeeper.
Yeah, great question, Mark. And yeah, it is. How do you stand out in a busy crowd, and what can you do if everyone's formatting the CVs in the same way? Then yeah, what else can you do? For me, if you're gonna apply to a job, send a covering letter. Definitely send a covering letter. Other things that have got my attention personally when I'm recruiting people to work for 300 North is try and make contact with the company or that person directly, whether that's trying to send them an email directly, whether it's a LinkedIn message, whether it's picking up the phone and trying to speak to them. Try and make that direct contact, because that shows me that you are, shows initiative. It shows me that you're going out of your way, above and beyond anyone else. Definitely try and covering letter, but then if you can, try and make some direct contact. That will definitely make you stand out.
So you're saying maybe you could try connecting on LinkedIn beforehand, or something, to ask some questions, or try some other method or something. Would that help?
Some way of making contact outside of sending the CV or applying to a job, whether that's through LinkedIn or other social media, or whether it's actually, like I said, picking the phone up and trying to speak to that person directly. Or if you can't get through to them on the phone and you don't know what their email address is, but you know where they work, phone the office and ask for that person's email address, and then send them an email directly and just say, look, I wanted to send you an email directly. I've just applied for this job. I've attached my CV again and a covering letter, but this is why I'm interested in the opportunity.
So in essence, there you're flagging yourself up, and meaning that you'll probably spend more than 5 seconds on their CV because they've already.
Absolutely, yeah, 100%. Absolutely. If someone did that for me and they're applying to work for us, I would pick up the phone and speak to them.
Likewise, if your inbox in the morning, you probably have, well, depending on what you're recruiting for, you could have upwards to like 100 applications. But if one person calls you, if one person's made themselves stand out, you'll always take that call, but you will not respond to 100 people who've all just emailed you. It's the truth. That's just how it works.
Yeah, exactly.
Got a question here from Ellie. if one of you can answer this. She said she was told previously not to add her address to a CV, as employers could decline based on her location distance from the job. Is this correct, incorrect? She's removed her address from the CV from this reason. What would you guys say in answer to that?
Personally, and I've seen sort of things online, advice saying don't put your address on it. Again, just from my experience of a recruiter, of sifting through thousands and thousands of applications, the address does matter. Yeah, employers like to know where people live. So I would say leave it on.
I'd say leave it on. And if you want to you can just put a location of where you are looking for a role. It might be that the application that you're making isn't right for that particular role. But if you're an active job seeker in a location, call it Leeds, just because I'm in the centre of Leeds, that you might be under consideration for something else. By not putting your location on, you're only applying for that one, for the one post that you've seen. And also on that, the truth is that very few people actually applied for the role that they actually end up getting. So as a recruiter, we'll keep your details and it'll be other vacancies that will come through. So it's incredibly rare that the person will actually send them one CV through and actually get the role. But if you're a good recruitment consultancy or employers, at the end, that they'll hold on to your details, and there may be others. So having a location on there shows where you're actually interested in working somewhere down the line.
Yeah, but I think what Tom said about if you are relocated, or if you can work somewhere else, put that at the top as well, so it's clear that if you're not close to where they are, but you move in there, or you can move there, or you can get a lift there, whatever it is, just highlight that, I suppose.
Yeah, so they don't rule you out without, fully knowing the full picture. You mentioned it briefly, Paul. In things like email addresses, because often people won't be able, if they're in a job, they might not be able to put their work email address down because they don't want their existing employer to know that they're looking for other jobs. What would you say do's or don'ts in terms of email addresses? You must have seen some bizarre ones over the years.
What, in terms of what your personal email address actually is?
Yeah, when we've all had stupid email addresses when we were younger. So
yeah, that's a good point. Actually, I've seen some beauties over the years. Don't come up with some crazy daft email address. Just keep it simple. That is a good point. I've seen some over the years, and I've just thought, wow. And that address has probably been the reason why I've not contacted that person. Everyone's got a personal email address, but try and make it not too contentious.
You don't want to stand out for the wrong reasons. That's what it's
Exactly.
Yeah, and we've done a whole webinar for which is on the YouTube channel for anyone else that wants to tap into it, around social media, because you said, Tom, that you then as part of your due diligence with people you think you want to have a conversation with, you then go and check them out online. And we've all got such a big digital footprint now. What are do's and, briefly, because obviously there could be a whole webinar on this, but what are do's or don'ts or stuff of your online?
I think in context of this and having a CV it's really important to make sure that anything that you have on a CV is also listed whatever other account you have. So your current employer, or just making sure the two are aligned, because very often you have a CV and then see some other experience and they're not. And it's just, for one, confusing, and it seems just a little bit pointless as to why it's not included in the first place. We've had applications here, and as soon as I'm sure like Paul, especially if we're going to employ it for ourselves, we triple check as to everything, all the background checks and everything else. Just make sure that would you employ yourself if you saw your online status, right? You can answer that yourselves, honestly. If you were to have a look at your own profile and then say, right, would an employer look at me twice? I think is the way that you need to handle your socials when you're looking for a job, because in all honesty, we will find it. And it's a really embarrassing reason sometimes to not be progressed to the next stage.
Great point. Yeah. Don't think that your social media profile is only visible to your friends or connections. Anyone can find it. That's a great point.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot more details on the actual social media webinar we did, but there's various privacy settings you can change. You know, we were all young at one stage, weren't we? And we were all, it's a good job camera phones and social media wasn't around when we were young. Otherwise, none of us would actually be employed. But yeah, so everything's visible now, and this generation, so much more is visible. And to a certain extent, they've got to show something because that's what you're looking for. But you know, it's what you do show and what is private and what isn't. So there's loads of guidance on that on the other webinar, which will prove useful, so that people don't get ruled out of a job just because of one post that they thought was to their mates. And we've all seen the stuff on, you know, in the press around kind of racism and cricketers and everything recently. And some of that is just, you know, some posts they did 10, 12 years ago when they were stupid or drunk or young or made a mistake or whatever. So, you know, I think there's a lot of stuff they can do around that just to make sure they're not ruled out for something because of something they said years and years ago. You mentioned covering letters, Paul.
Yeah.
What do you put in a covering letter? How long should it be? How detailed? You know, is it cut and paste? What's good advice on that, please?
Good question. I don't think it needs to be very long at all. I don't know, 4 or 5, 6 sentences. What should you put on a covering letter? Which job it is that you're applying for. I will put your personal contact details on there again, just in case. Point out why are you actually applying for this job? What is it about that job that interests you? How does that link in with your own sort of career goals and ambitions? Maybe even highlight any specific skills or experience that you've had that is relevant to the job description. So make sure you read the job description. What is it they're actually looking for? And then try and sort of match that to what you are actually looking for yourself. So just simple things like that, really. It doesn't have to be a really long-winded letter. It's just highlighting and pointing out to the employer that, look, I am serious about this job, and by sending this covering letter and explaining in a few sentences why, hopefully I'm going to stand out from the crowd.
Tom, anything to add to that?
It's answering the question before it's been asked. So if I get you on the phone and you're applying for a role, I say, why are you interested in this role? So if you can tell me why you're interested and just put that information out there before I need to ask, I already know that you're keen. I already know why you want this. So that's already got you ahead of other people. And when you say covering letter, I don't think you need to have a completely separate document. If it's on an email, it can just be a paragraph that goes with it. It's just the reason that you're calling. It's the reason that you would, or the details maybe that if you met somebody and you shook their hand as to why you're talking about that particular vacancy. That's the sort of information, that kind of detail.
And something that you often get advice with CVs is how much would you change your CV for different types of roles? Obviously not, you know, lying within it, but do you change your CV for different, because you might be applying for different types of jobs in different sectors? And
yeah, no, I think you can. And I think if you're at the earlier part of your career as well, you do have way more options than somebody who's maybe 10, 20 years down the line. So if you need to align your CV, your experience, all the rest of your skills and your passions into something that is more aligned, then do, if that gives you the better chance. But just don't mix it up. Make sure you know what CV has been sent where, because it's going to be the quickest way for you to be overlooked if you're not aligning it to the actual role you're applying for, which still happens. People still do that as well. It's crazy. And
another question back to you, Tom. Paul mentioned it earlier around interest, volunteering. You know, the personal stuff. Yeah. Often that's the tiniest bit of a CV.
I love that part. Actually, for the first time in all of my time in recruitment,
why is that important? What does that tell you about someone? Why do you look at that?
It's because you get to know the person. So we're either engaged as recruiters to understand what the client is looking for, the team, the company, the culture, all the rest of that, or we're recruiting for ourselves, and we know the people that are there within that business, or their style, or what they're looking at, which should make a recruiter good at their job by understanding that. And having a little bit more of an insight into those hobbies, those interests, what people do with their time, their volunteer time, however that works, goes a really long way. And it was about 2 weeks ago, I read just that Hobbies and Interests. And for the first time, it actually made me laugh. It made me laugh out loud as to what this girl had put down in terms of what she does and what she wants to do with her career and whatnot. And that was just such an easy conversation. Picked up the phone, called her, went straight off the back of her hobbies, interests, everything else. And yeah, she was forward for the vacancy really, really quickly, because it felt like you knew a little bit more about her on top of just the work experience, which is a list.
Anything to add to that, Paul, from your perspective? Because you mentioned it.
It tells me about that person's personality. What kind of, as Tom said, what kind of person are they, and their hobbies and interests, that matches the kind of personality that person is. And depending on what the job is, then that job could be suited to a certain kind of personality. You could probably do a whole different section on personality profiles and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, generally, a person's hobbies and interests, they do it because they like doing it because that's their personality. And then that personality can be better matched to certain jobs. If I know what a person's hobbies and interests are, I know whether, well, you can take a guess as to whether that person could be good at what we're looking for them to do. It's like I said, you could do a whole another hour or two on profiling, but it's fascinating.
And coming back to a point you raised earlier, around kind of flagging it up and giving you a call or something, would the person that's doing that, would they be able to get more out of you than was on the online advert and so on and so forth? Would they be able to kind of tap you up for a bit of information that would help them personalise their covering letter or those sorts of things and stand out? Is it useful for that perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I've given that advice before. If someone's made contact with me and it turns out that they're not the right person for that particular role, then yeah, of course, I'd love to give them any tips and advice on what they can do to secure the next one. I think it depends on who you're actually speaking to as to whether they would want to do that. But personally, I would want to give that advice.
I was just thinking then, I'm sure earlier on in my career in recruitment, we used to get so many more phone calls from candidates chasing jobs. I never really thought about it before now, but that used to be quite a big part of your day. Incoming calls from candidates asking more information. Am I right? What else have you got?
Yeah.
Can I go for it? Please put me forward. I think this is great for me. And selling themselves maybe a little bit more. And I don't know when that stopped. Well, certainly since I've had post-recruitment, it hardly ever happens now. People don't push themselves forward. They'll press send on an application and then, I don't know, just hit and hope or cross the fingers. But yeah, just as an observation now, it very rarely happens.
Definitely, I've seen that as well, Tom.
So if these guys and are to stand out, is the advice almost not to use that spray? I don't know how they're being advised by Job Centre and other people and stuff, but is the advice to maybe do less applications and put more effort into them and flag themselves up than just send it out to thousands and it be generic? Does that personal touch and that bit of effort go a bit further? Because if you're not getting many phone calls nowadays, then surely they would stand out, wouldn't they?
I think proactivity will go an incredibly long way at the moment.
Yeah.
The job market the way it is, if you've seen something that you want and you can put yourself forward with some desire, I think you've got a fighting chance of that vacancy right now. Just to be able to push yourself forward will go a long way.
Still apply for it. Still go through the knowledge.
Yeah.
Yeah. Go the extra mile to stand out.
And just as a side note, do you guys know kind of what percentage of jobs go through recruitment sites and through you guys? Because, you know, it's very hard. Not many employers advertise direct anymore, do they?
I don't know what. I think it will be. Those figures would be very different depending on the market that you're in. I think some of the more niche and the specialist roles will go through some of the recruiters, and then the more volume roles will be direct. But I think it works. I think it doesn't matter so much whether it's going to be through a recruiter, whether it's a direct employer. I think everybody will have a funnel, a filter to be able to get through people. But even applying directly to a company, if you've seen a vacancy, I think that would work with the same gravitas, with the same strength as an application through to a recruiter.
Yeah, I just wondered that. Just came into my head. Then that, you know, so many people will have to go through a gatekeeper like yourself, and internal recruiters will probably apply the same rigor as you.
It will, but I think even if it's an internal recruiter, then the internal recruiters that I do deal with, I think most of those are ex-agency recruiters as well. So if you've got somebody that is trying to push themselves forward, that person will be on their radar. So again, they're some of the clients that we recruit for, those guys are just awash with vacancies. So there's pressure under those guys to fill as many of the vacancies for the business as they possibly can. So if they have someone pushing themselves forward with a little bit of proactivity, a little bit of passion, they'll think about the other vacancies, maybe the one that you've not seen that's online that could still be relevant for you.
Yeah, good point. I think the important thing to remember here is, although we can't say this percentage of jobs go through recruiters, the vast majority of companies will try to recruit and hire themselves directly first, and then it's usually if they can't, or if it's a specialist niche role, then they would come to a recruiter. But there will be more jobs advertised online directly by companies than employers, than agencies. Sorry.
Okay, and we mentioned it briefly, but LinkedIn is effectively like an online CV in itself, isn't it? So when you're cross-referencing against someone's LinkedIn, we don't need to go into too many details because we have covered LinkedIn in one of the things. But what are you guys looking for as recruiters, or what is a red flag, or those sorts of things?
I'm looking for consistency. I want to see what's on a CV is the same as what you have on your LinkedIn profile, or if there's a valid reason as to why not. I know you've covered it on the earlier things, but you can just apply with your LinkedIn profile. So it should just marry up to the CV that you're sending, which is just another medium potentially for the same vacancy. Education, making sure that education is the same. And to be fair, your hobbies, your interests, you can get on there on LinkedIn as well. So just making sure they marry up, so that there's no gaps, or if the gaps are on there, that the gaps are explained. Because being in recruitment, I'm sure Paul's going to be the same. But if you're in recruitment long enough, if you start to see unexplained gaps on CV, or especially LinkedIn, the way that LinkedIn works, you can almost start to think the worst. You need to have a reason as to why, and even if it's just job seeking, put it in there. Explain that you were actively job seeking between that time. Nobody likes to see gaps in experience, or unexplained gaps, sorry, in their experience and LinkedIn.
I agree 100%. If there's a gap, just put the reason why there's a gap. But human nature automatically thinks the worst case scenario. They ask the question why is that missing? Why doesn't that match up? Why is there a gap? And it's just the way, it's just the way sort of the human nature works. You always assume or ask the question why and think worst case scenario. So fill in the gaps, even if it's like Tom said, that you were looking for a job.
To point that out in the extreme, and the one, it's the story that I tell pretty much everyone I ever worked with or whatnot. There was years of a unexplained absence on somebody's CV years ago, probably about 10 years or so ago, when I was working for another recruitment consultancy. And I met the guy, he was in front of me, because we used to do that more and more then as well. And when he was explaining as to why, it's because he'd been in prison for manslaughter. So it was one that certainly needed raising for any future. His conviction had been spent and he was out and he was looking for another role. But that was something that as a recruiter or as an employer just needed to be aware of. And if the truth is forward and any situation can be dealt with, it's when you hide it that people find out and people again just think the worst. So it's almost as bad as it can be. As long as it's addressed up front, it can be worked with.
Okay, so just towards the end of the CV, people always have their references or referees or whatever. What's your opinion on, do you put available on request, or do you put who it's going to be, and what sort of people should you have for those references, and what do they need to say, presumably, to be honest? Paul, you okay to answer?
Yeah, I can answer that. I think if you can put referees on there, I would say do it. If it's a work reference, great, put that on there. If there isn't any work history, if you've done any volunteering, if someone like that could give you a reference, and if there's nothing, no work experience or no volunteering experience, then someone that could give you a character reference. Not a member of family, someone that knows you that's not a member of family.
Tom, anything to add to that?
I agree. Just as far and wide as you can go as well. It's somebody who will support your application. So no family members, but somebody who knows you as to what you've done, even the volunteering, or I'm a little bit loath to say if for education, because any reference that comes through from education pretty much reads the same from an employer's point of view. But if that's as far back as you need to go, then do it. At least your application is going to be supported by someone. But yeah, I would say that at this stage in your careers, to volunteer that there are referees that will back up your application is going to be great to see on your CV.
Okay, that's great. So just moving on to the next stage, because we're stepping a bit beyond the CV now, but before we were recording, you guys kind of said a bit about, application, interview preparation. Assuming your CV stood out, you flagged it up, a recruiter or the employer thinks, this person is worth having a chat with. What's the next stage generally after they've looked at your CV?
So the next stage is going to be having a conversation. Is going to be talking to us. So somebody will reach out to you. I'd say if it's through a recruiter, they will give you a call. So going back to the basics of making sure you've got the right telephone number. Some people have more than one number. Whatever the easiest way to get hold of you is, just put those details on. If you're going to have a conversation about an application, get yourself somewhere quiet. Even if you're out on a busy street or you've got loads of background noise, I don't know, anything, you can even agree to call the person back right? That's okay. Get somewhere where it's going to be quiet, where you're not going to be interrupted, where you're not going to be disturbed, so that we can get the best account of you. And really, all we're going to do is go through the details that we have on the CV. We're going to ask for a little bit more context in some cases around it. For the love of goodness, be honest, right? Help us. We're not there to try and trip you up. We're there to try and make sure we've got a rounded picture as to your application and your suitability for the role. Knowing your CV is also really important. So if you've written something or a covering letter and you've applied for a fair few, understand what you've put down, okay? There's nothing worse than asking somebody about your last role or the position before, and you get a blank. So once you've written your details, read it through, understand it, make sure that you can support, if asked, what the rest of that application, what the rest of that CV and application says. Really, really important.
Paul, anything to add?
Just make sure you've read the job description. Sounds an easy and a simple one. Make sure you've read the job description. Make sure you know what they're looking for. If you know what they're looking for in terms of any experience or skills or qualifications or whatever it is, you can then make sure that you get that information across on that call. It's yeah, you'd be surprised at how many people don't read it, or when I ask the question, have you read the job description, and you get the answer, no. Instantly that tells me, well, you're not actually that interested about the job, so it'll probably end up with the conversation being cut short. But demonstrate that you've read it and you've got some knowledge, and you can ask some questions back to the interviewer.
And presuming they've got past that stage, what's the next stage generally? I mean, we won't go into interview techniques because that's a whole other webinar on itself, but you briefly mentioned interview preparation. Assuming that call's gone pretty well, they've been invited to interview, what should they do as preparation for that interview?
Well, I think as an example, you've heard as to what a recruiter is looking for in your CV and your background, your social media, all this good stuff. You need to be able to go into an interview situation or to whatever the next stage is, having done, I think, a similar level of preparation as the role that you're applying for. So who is going to be talking to you about this role? What's the company doing? What's in the news at the minute? And by far and away, you don't need to know the company financials for the past 10 years. But if they happen to have been in the news recently, it's good to know. Little sound bites like that show me that you're interested. Or if it's a direct application, they'll know that you've done some research, and be proud of it. Ask the question, make it known that you've done more than the norm in terms of your research, in terms of both that vacancy, the company, and maybe even the person that's talking to you about the role. It'll go a really, really long way.
Paul, anything to add on interview preparation?
Yeah, great tips. Research, like Tom said, make sure you've used the internet, you've looked on a company website. So again, it sounds a simple one. Make sure you've been on the website. You know about the company. You know where they've got offices. You've got an idea of the services that they offer. You've got an idea of the directors that work there. Make sure you've gone out of your way, and you're showing you've gone out of your way to do the research. One thing that sort of sometimes stands out to me is look at the company values. What does that company actually stand for? What are their values, and do they match your own personal values? If they do, mention it, highlight it, point it out. Yeah, LinkedIn, if so, whoever is interviewing you, can you find their LinkedIn profile? What does their LinkedIn profile tell you about them? Even looking back at where they've worked previously might just help to give you that little bit of an edge. If you say, oh, look, I know you used to work for so-and-so, you're just demonstrating that you've done your research. So yeah, internet, LinkedIn, do your research, look at the website.
And one of following on from what Paul said there, and from an earlier point, if you want to get it across that you have done some research and you've been poking around as the company or them, and you're on LinkedIn, send them a LinkedIn request. There's no easier way for them to find out that you are actually researching them before they've spoken to you than you sending through a connection request. And that's just telling them that you're doing work behind the scenes. So it will always look good.
Another quick thing, assuming they've got a great CV, now they've followed all your tips and so on and so forth. I mean, I'm not a recruiter, but I know you guys look for CVs in certain places. If you've been asked to recruit someone, you'll actually headhunt people. Where can they post their CVs, and what should they be putting on a CV so that someone finds it? Because do you search on keywords, or how does it work?
Yeah. Well, I'll answer the first bit where you should post it, and then Tom, if you want to talk about how we actually find people.
Yeah.
And again, it depends on what kind of work you're looking for as to which job board is better suited for that. But the major ones are the ones like CV Library, Total Job, Reed, Indeed, Monster. I mean, personally, we mainly use CV Library, Total Jobs, and Indeed. We found over the years that they work better for us, but that's just purely in our industry. You might find that Tom has better success with other job boards. A good way to test which job board you should be registered with, if you do a quick Google search for whatever job it is that you're looking for, that job title in the area that you're looking for. So if it's administrator in Leeds, put that into Google, hit return, which job boards appear first. And whichever ones are on the front page, you need to make sure you've got your CV registered with that job board. That's a real easy and simple way to know which job boards you need to be registered with.
So how we go about searching for it, and I think making that answer more relevant to guys at your stage of your career, is if we're going to be looking for a database administrator or a trainee database administrator, for example, that we have the ability to look through all thousands of CVs very quickly by doing a keyword search or looking for phrases or education phrases, and we can mix it up a different way around what salary maybe you're looking for. So making sure everything is really relevant to you goes a really long way, especially with salary and salary expectations, availability. We can search on all of that, depending on the job board, to be honest. What I would say, if I'm looking for an online marketing manager, which is relevant to me right now, there's 100 different ways of looking for that. At your stage of your career, if you are looking for a trainee role, or you're looking for something that offers a little bit more support, I think the way the job boards will work is tying that into your cover letter and making sure that the text, the wording, or your ambition, where you want to go, is highlighted there. And make sure that's also submitted as part of your CV as to what's going to be online, and we're able to find you that way. So for example, if it's going to be let's go basic, a trainee recruitment consultant, but you don't have any recruitment consultancy experience, you need to put on that CV or that cover letter that you are looking for a trainee recruitment consultancy role, and that will help us find you. I think that's a trick that's probably not used as much for people earlier on in their careers, but would work. If it's more specialist or there's qualifications, both Paul and I, the vacancies that we find have very specific qualifications most of the time. We can search and take thousands of CVs down to sometimes probably just a handful based around qualifications. So again, making sure that they're clear on your CV and your application can really help us find it from the other side.
Okay, so we've covered a huge amount there, and thanks for your kind of a poacher turned gamekeeper advice for what it's like for these people on the other end, because they're probably not aware, of all of these things, and it'll help them in future. And there's loads of guidance. So in general, it seems like it's better to put more effort into a fewer number of jobs than just spray and pray and just you know, have just generic stuff that you send out? Would you say, as a general principle?
I'd agree. Yes.
And then are those, you know, likely to lead to a better job, a better paid job in a sector that you want to be in, or those sort of things? Are those two things linked generally or not?
I think if you've got something that you've got some passion and some real interest to, the job will always be better than something that you've just had to take. So putting that extra effort into something that really ticks some initial boxes for you will go a long, long way. Like I said earlier on, at the start of your career, you have more options and directions that you can go in realistically than people who are further down the line, because they'll end up becoming more and more narrow in terms of the options that either they want to do or can do. So picking things and putting some real effort into a fewer applications, which is something you can get excited about, will go a really long way later down the line.
Anything to add to that, Paul?
I was just about to say, well said.
Yeah. Well, the reason why I say that as well is, you know, lots of us kind of fall into sectors or careers or whatever, but it's a really relevant point there, Tom. If you're into fashion or sport, or you've got a thing, then at this stage in their career, you can maybe steer yourself more towards that, and it might, you know, you're in a career for a long time, aren't you? In 40 odd years or whatever. So, you know, if you can steer it towards something that you love or really good at, then now's the best time, because when you get to our age, it's very hard to change sectors and careers, isn't it?
I mean, I'm only guessing, but I'm sure Paul's the same as me. All he ever wanted to be was a recruitment consultant from being a young. He didn't fall into it at all. So
everyone falls into recruitment. Everyone falls into it, but we do it because there's parts of that role that we enjoy, that matches our personality, whether it's helping people, talking to people, the competitive side of it. That's why people fall into our role. But typically, when I was at school, college, university, I did a degree in sports science. Never even thought that I would get into recruitment. Had a spell of being a teacher, but found that I was good at it. I enjoyed it. I got a lot of sort of personal satisfaction, reward from helping people out of it, and that's why I've stuck at it. But yeah, going back to what Mark said, what is it that you really enjoy doing? What are you really passionate about? What is going to make you get out of bed in the morning and really give it that extra push? And now, yeah, more than ever, it's easier to make sure you get yourself on that path. And it might be that you're not in the right position right now, and that's fine. Don't beat yourself up about it, but have that idea, that vision, that goal around what is it that you actually ultimately would dream about doing.
Okay, thanks for that. I'm going to open up now. A few people have had to go, I think, because their lunch hour's over now. But is there any questions from anyone? If they want to put them in the chat or whatever. And I think we said we'd do a quick review of someone's CV that they sent to us and asked us to have a look at, that we've kind of anonymized for them. So are you guys okay to quickly look at that for us if I share my screen?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
So here we are. So if anyone's got any questions, feel free to put them in the chat while the guys are on. But tell me where to scroll up or scroll down. But what's your opinion of this CV as you're looking at it? Any tips or hints?
Well, they've got the personal details, contact details at the top. That's tick for number one on my advice. Formatting looks okay. It's easy to read. I've maybe put, if you're being really picky, put a space in between sort of the end of the personal statement and employment history. If you're
always picky as me with stuff like
personal statement a little bit, but it's not overly long.
This is all working out, yeah. For me, again, all nice, straightforward, clean, easygoing. shows that they're still there. There's currently football scholarship club, maybe, and this, just trying to make it a little, open it up for other people as well. A lot of people will work for employers or volunteer or whatnot. Now, if they've been there for a period of time, that company is known to them. When you put it forward on a CV or an application, most of the time, unless you've been in a particular market for a number of years, you don't know that employer. So giving a little context around it. So if it was, I don't know, working for Asda, say, and you're working at the head office, working in a head office with 2,500 people, it gives just a little bit of context as to what that company actually does.
Okay, just scroll down again, Mark. So I would, so we've jumped straight from personal statement to employment history. I would possibly condense, looking back down at the qualifications that we've got there, they look to be quite detailed and lengthy. Year 2 grades, do you need to have that in there? Again, depending on what job it is you're applying for, I would say possibly not. There seems to be a lot of detail in there. You could probably condense that in terms of qualifications down and put that above employment history, so that it's on that first page.
So is it fair to say, kind of, as you get more experience, the education and qualifications and stuff becomes less important? You just kind of say, look, you've got a degree. You don't need to put all the grades that you got.
Yeah, I think just knowing what degree you did, what the course was, which university it was, and what your overall result was is fine. Same with BTECs or A levels or GMVQs. Just what the course was, where you did it, the dates, and the results. I don't think you need to go into all that detail on the sort of the module breakdown.
Sorry, Mark, I think through the scrolling, I picked up on a little bit. There was something in there about what the person wants to be doing longer term, about studying before a master's. I can't see it. I lost it just as you were going through.
Yeah, next steps of completing a master's in the future.
In the future. Now, I'd say there's two different schools of thought with that. A future employer could look at that and go, absolutely amazing, this person wants to study a master's and better themselves. We might be able to part fund that if it's the right role, or we might, we're absolutely supporting that. I say on the flip side, you get employers who are going, actually, is this person applying for a role because they want to leave me in 6 months and do a full-time master's? Am I going to employ a person, train them, and then they're going to leave and go into further education? Is it going to be a part-time, which can run concurrently with education? I think just a little bit more about being a little bit ambiguous about short-term aims on a CV and an application would be probably a way to maybe improve that. Because again, if you're an employer, I'm thinking, are they going to leave me? Are they going to stay? What's going to happen with that? So maybe either leaving that and talking that through with your ambition in an interview stage, or putting a little bit more clarification as what you're thinking with that. Be my idea.
Yeah. One thing that I didn't mention earlier, Mark, and it's quite an important thing to mention, that the reason why the CV formatting is important, and the order at which things appear on the CV. That's how, if you're uploading a CV to a job board, that's how that job board's ATS system, applicant tracking system, reads the CV, and it picks up the information. So having it in that order is actually quite vital if you are going to be either uploading it to a job board or applying to a job through a recruiter. Chances are there'll be some kind of applicant tracking system and software that reads the CV and it pulls that information across into their system. If it's not in that order, the chances are that it just might not read it.
Mm. And we didn't really get into personal statements before, but they're a tricky thing, aren't they? Because you've probably seen ones that make them look like they're they've achieved more than Elon Musk, and then you get people at the other end of the spectrum that just aren't doing themselves justice. And so what do you put in there? What's the key point to that, and what do you fill it with so that you do yourself justice but don't come across as arrogant or?
Great question. So going back to what I said, so who are you, what can you offer the employer, and what are your career goals? But then breaking it down into more detail. So listing your skills, strengths and experience, highlighting any particular education or qualifications or training that is relevant to that particular role. Try and sort of get across why, sort of your passion, why is it that you're interested in that role. It's tailoring, I suppose, going back to what Tom said, the personal statement can be tweaked and changed to tailor for the particular role that you're applying for. So the personal statement might not always stay the same. It could be changed depending on the job that you're applying for.
And add to that, Tom?
There's way too many cliches in personal statements. We all know that you work well as an individual and a team and all of that. There's no need to. I mean, yeah, punctual, committed, hardworking. I should hope so. You're looking for a job. So and if you can read this one, that will probably be the same with another 20. So it's finding something to actually make it a little bit different. I like that during my journey of a degree, I've learned such problem solving, time management. It actually, that, if anything, that just makes it just a little bit more personal. I have a willingness to learn skills and improve. It's just a little bit, it makes it a little bit more personable. But the other one is probably just more of a list. So yeah, whatever, get a little bit of you across, I think is just the shorter answer as to what me and Paul's both saying there. That's what we want to see.
Okay, and just skipping to the bottom as well, we could discuss it before, but kind of hobbies and interests. Is that enough, or do you need to go into more details, or you need to explain how they help you?
You know what I'd say with that? So looking at that as hobbies and interests, highly involved participating, like golf. All right. So if you play golf, which I don't, but if you do, whereabouts do you play? Okay. It might be the fact that wherever you've applied for, they also play golf there. Football can be a little bit contentious if you put who you support, in case you're applying for someone against your arch enemy. But going to the gym, great. Like what are you into within the gym, or have you done any sporting events, anything that your level of fitness has got, whether it's cycling and it was like a group sport or something you can shout about. It's less about trying to tell the story about you, but having a connection with someone who's maybe reading this, or we might just refer back to the job a little bit more. So nothing really could be better than with playing golf at the same club as the person that you're applying for a job with, potentially. Just little connections that's going to get that conversation going.
And Paul, just on these additional qualifications, just looking at it now, you'll know better than me, but this kind of says to me they've got a commitment to improve themselves. They put stuff in there beyond just their degree and beyond. It shows that presumably this person is applying for jobs in sport as well. So the fact they've got all these additional qualifications says that they want to better themselves and stuff. Would you add anything to that, or?
Well, yeah, definitely. But again, put them further up, make them stand out. Don't leave them at the bottom.
All right, yeah. So they're probably more important than they've.
Yeah.
Rather than what they got, what percentage they got in a module in their second.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, definitely. It could be just that particular job that they're applying for requires them to have a level 2 gym instructor qualification. But if it's at the bottom of the CV, they might not get that far down. So stick it further up.
Yeah. Right. So let's just see if there's any quick questions. A few just saying thanks and so on and so forth, and I'll catch up on the recording. So I'll thank you both for your time. I think it's really, really useful. You've both experienced it yourself as Kickstart employers. There's some really, really good employees out there that just happen to be in the jobs market because they've just come out of university or college or education at the wrong time, or they've been made redundant as part of the pandemic. There's a lot of, rough diamonds that can be polished up and so on and so forth. But it's just passing the test, isn't it? That's the tricky bit. Once they're in, most of them have proved themselves really, really capable, but they've got to get in, haven't they? So.
Yeah, and I think with all of this that we've covered, I think if there's more information that's required about this, then we're more than happy to help as well. So,
yeah. John, Paul, sorry.
No, just saying, feel free to share my email address, Mark, if anyone's got any questions or want to drop me a note directly. Quite happy to do that.
Yeah, or we'll put your LinkedIn profile on there so they can connect with you via LinkedIn.
They can cross-check it, yeah.
and also, for those that haven't looked at the voluntary training modules yet, if you look in the voluntary training modules that you've all been sent as employees on the Kickstart scheme, there's loads of extra training in there on CV writing, interview techniques, loads and loads of stuff in there. So feel free to use that. It's all part of the support. So if nobody's got any more questions, we'll just thank Tom and Paul for their time and their expertise. It's hopefully really useful for people, whether it's now or whether it's some point in the future. We'd like to thank you for your time.
Pleasure.
No problem. Thank you. Good luck, everyone.
Bye.
Take care, guys. See you later.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye.